We've got 2 minutes. Sometimes you just have to kick on the last word. I'm going to skip that one. You'll wonder what that meant forever. I know. I'm going to end with this one. And this one is pretty important. I haven't seen a lot of disabled employees or students or faculty today. But I'm used to seeing a lot of disabled employees. I think NASA is so good to disabled employees that they really focus on helping make their lives better. Whether it's advanced equipment on a computer or just something as simple as a ramp going up to a building, they really care for the disabled employees. And I've got to end with this one, but I think you'll appreciate this last one. This is a picture of the disabled workers at the Kennedy Space Center, just a select group of them, by the way. And I'm not going to say anymore, but they're a great group of people who are very capable people. Now, at Marshall Space Flight Center, a different part of the story altogether, I had a secretary named Loria West who was in a wheelchair. Loria survived a car crash with her parents. Her parents were killed when she was 10. Her 2 little brothers lived. She raised her little brothers, confined to a wheelchair the rest of her life. Today, she's a GS-14 at the Marshall Space Flight Center, making a difference in this world. So, one more thing about Loria before I tell you the final point on disabled people. This is Loria when John Glenn flew. You remember he flew on STS-95 and on the shuttle. He flew a long time ago on that first orbital mission. When he flew on the shuttle, he came to Huntsville, where Bernie and I lived at the time, Huntsville, Alabama, and we had a parade in his honor. And I ride a motorcycle, so there I am on a motorcycle. I saw Loria in her wheelchair over on the side of the parade route, and John Glenn's car had come to a temporary stop, so I inched over to Loria and said, "Would you like to ride on my bike?" She was my secretary. I don't think I told you that. So anyway, she said, "Yeah, I would." Well, I thought I was joking, but obviously I wasn't. Her friends picked her up out of her wheelchair and set her on the back of my bike. And this is a picture that was taken, and she has it on her desk and says, "Forevermore she will," how proud she was to ride it. So the point so far is disabled people can make every contribution. In fact, I'd even argue, I had a grandfather, a blind man, by the way. I'd argue that if you have disabilities in one particular area, like if you don't have eyesight, I think you have accentuated capabilities in other areas, whether it's touch or smell or hearing. You tend to accentuate to compensate for it. So focus on their abilities, not their disabilities. This is the last story I'm going to tell. It's all related to disabilities, of course, but here's the deal. Bernie and I had a piece of lake property in Athens, Alabama, just 20 miles from Huntsville. That's the Tennessee River behind us. This was our property, standing here taking that picture. Okay? Doris and Benny Sisk live 2 doors down from us. This is a picture of Doris and Benny looking at the same Tennessee River. Okay? So, we went to a dinner party out there for 100 people. We didn't have a house, we just had an empty lot because I was a government guy and couldn't afford a house. I had a house in Huntsville. Anyway, so Doris came up to me. I didn't know her very well at all, and she said, "We have something in common." She said, "I understand you have a house in this subdivision in Huntsville, and we both have property out here at the lake. Isn't that a coincidence?" To which I said, "Yeah, Doris, that's quite a coincidence." So then the hostess said, "If everybody will be seated, we're ready to start dinner." Because Doris came over to tell me about this little coincidence, she said, "Well, can we sit together?" So the 4 of us sat together at this table, and I said, "I wonder what else we have in common." If she hadn't mentioned that little thing we have in common, none of this ever would have happened. And this is where you got to believe me how true it is. So we played this game. 1 minute later. She said, "Well, let me see, I'm from Oklahoma." I said, "Get out of here. My mother's from Oklahoma. How about that? What a small world." "Yeah, I grew up in a little town called Lee." I said, "No, my mother grew up in a little town called Lee, Oklahoma." She said, "Yeah, my father was a Methodist minister in Lee, Oklahoma." I said, "Doris, how many Methodist churches can there be in Lee, Oklahoma 60 years ago when there wasn't but 100 people in the whole town?" So, I mean, I knew we had some strange small world experience about to go on here. But then she told me that in 1942 there was a tornado. That's not all that relevant, except the fact that the tornado blew her father's church down. And what she remembered, and this is not being prompted by me, this is why this is so hard to imagine. She said, "What I remember is that my dad had to rebuild that church. The farmers were typically busy with their farming, and they couldn't all just come build the church." But she said, "My dad did most of it, but he had this blind man named Jim to help him." That's all she could remember, a blind man named Jim to help him. I said, "Doris, my grandfather was a blind man named Jim in Lee, Oklahoma." And I mean, I truly get goosebumps when I think about this. So, there's a blind man named Jim, and I've got a grandfather named Nat. So, I went home, I called my mother, this was my mother, and a fake picture, of course, so I can tell you about her. But we called Mom, we said, Mom, do you remember all of this? And she said, I do indeed, but I don't have any way to document it for sure. But let me call my brother. So she picked up the phone and called my Uncle Jimmy, who, by the way, sadly passed away just 2 months ago. But I'm glad to have him in this final story. Uncle Jimmy said, not only do I remember it, but I have a brochure in the attic that I've had since 1942 that I want to get out of the attic. He went up in the attic and he got out this 55-page brochure commemorating the Methodist Church in Leedy, Oklahoma back in 1943. And when you open that up, one of the pictures in the book is a picture of Doris. That's Doris right there. Oh. No, really, isn't it strange? And she tells me that tall man up on the scaffolding is a blind man named Jim. And I wouldn't put it past him. My grandfather could do anything, even though he was blind. But I can't attest to that for sure. But page number 1 is the preacher, Doris's father, and at the bottom of the page, Doris's mother. And you turn that page one more time, and you have a picture of a blind man named Jim. This is my grandfather who helped her father rebuild the church 45 years earlier and 1,000 miles away. And I just wanted to end on that story as a way of saying that folks with disabilities are every bit as able as all of the rest of us. And with that, I'm finished. Oh, let me do this because I did this just for you. You gotta recognize it. I'm told that the USA is made up of Texas and outlying states. I didn't want to put this until we bond, because I don't want you to get mad and leave me. But we all know that that can't be true because nobody can outlie a Texan. Is that something commonly known in Texas? I don't know. I don't know if you heard it for the first time, but I always thought it was kind of cute. And just to make it feel better, I made tip number 50. So, with that. But if you have
the U.S. is made up of Texas and outlying states. That can't be true, as nobody can outline a Texas.
Without, I'll throw open the questions, and just anything you want to talk about is fair game.